Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Clarisse Fortuné. First, the stories making headlines across the continent. Getting closer and closer, M23 rebels are on the edge of Goma in eastern Congo. Thousands of people have been displaced. Hospitals are overwhelmed as casualties from the offensive continue to grow. Access to social media is now blocked in South Sudan for at least 30 days. The measure following graphic videos of violence against South Sudanese nationals in Sudan that sparked outrage. Daniel Chapo was sworn in as Mozambique's president amid tensions. It's now time for the business community to get back to work. Weeks of unrest have cost the private sector millions of dollars. But we start in eastern DRC. Panic has now spread in Goma, with M23 rebels steadily inching closer to the city as they battle the Congolese army. The rebel group has been making significant advances in recent weeks, closing in now on Goma, which is home to around 2 million people and a regional hub for security and humanitarian efforts. Thousands of displaced people have already reached the outskirts of the city. Laurent Berstecher has more.
Crumbling under the weight of their luggage, these families were headed towards Goma, the latest stop of a never-ending escape. Since the start of the week, tens of thousands of refugees have been flocking towards the North Kivu capital as the Congolese army battles to contain the M23's advance.
Armed forces are everywhere. They asked us to evacuate Nzulo this morning because of the clashes. We haven't had a moment's peace since the start of this war. Everywhere we go, the situation is uncertain. We don't know what to do.
Fighting between the Congolese army and M23 rebels intensified this week after the Rwanda-backed group captured the town of Minova on Tuesday. On Thursday, more clashes were reported near Sake, less than 30 kilometers north of Goma. Outside the provincial capital, lines of vehicles, soldiers, militias, and UN peacekeepers were headed to the front line under the helpless gaze of local populations. And while fighting was still a distance away, experts fear the constant influx of refugees could stretch the city's resources to the limit.
The camps are really overcrowded. There are reports of sexual violence and killings. Humanitarian aid is insufficient to support those populations. If we add those from Minova and other villages, the city could become nearly impossible to live in.
Speaking to France 24 on Wednesday, Congolese Communications Minister Patrick Muyaya once again denounced Rwanda's financial and military backing of the M23. And while he welcomed international condemnations against Kigali, he also called on the international community to impose concrete sanctions on Rwandan officials.
And we're hearing reports that hospitals in Goma are now overwhelmed as casualties from the ongoing M23 rebel offensive continue to grow, with medical staff struggling to cope with the influx. Let's bring in Emmanuel Lar. He's from Médecins Sans Frontières. He joins us live from Kinshasa. Welcome, Emmanuel Lar. Please, can you tell us what's going on? What have you been hearing in Goma?
Yeah, good evening. As you just rightfully mentioned, today was a quite harsh day and adds to weeks now of intense and closing in fighting to the city of Goma, where we need to remind, it was mentioned 2 million as a denominator, but 600,000 at least are internally displaced people living in camps close to the borders, in the close neighborhoods of Goma city center. Heavy artillery shooting, RPGs being used, that has a tremendous impact, of course, on the mental health of people that are already being displaced now for 2 to 3 years, most of them. And over the past weeks, the hospitals, Médecins Sans Frontières has been supporting, have been overwhelmed by the number of wounded, from Masisi, from Minova, close to 400, and the referral hospitals in Goma are completely overwhelmed. So we are working on that, but the closing in of this whole armed conflict and context is rendering the whole situation and delivering aid to the most necessity more and more challenging, difficult.
And what kind of wounds the hospitals have to treat?
So we see an increasing number of civilians. I think that is noteworthy, 30 to 40%. Most of them from fighting, shooting, but also an increasing number of explosions due to the use of heavy artillery, rockets close to, for example, IDP camps. And I think it's the occasion again, the opportunity to remind all that even in times of war, there are some basic rules. The civil character of IDP camps needs at all time to be reminded, and medical care cannot become under fire. In the Masisi hospital, our teams have left bullets hitting the hospital wards, and even RPG rockets coming in, even wounding some of our field collaborators. So the opportunity here to remind that, while again, the whole context is more and more challenging, but we try to remain present and keep on delivering.
And on that note, to protect the civilians and also your teams, have you been talking to the authorities to help you in that struggle?
Of course. Yes, of course. And we keep all channels open to all parties of the conflict. I think that is one of the parameters of a neutral and impartial organization that tries to be next to the most necessitous. Tomorrow, I will have a conversation with the Minister of Health, because it's very important, while we all pay attention to diplomatic efforts, the military operations on ground, and the communication war that is also ongoing, that we put forward the human cost and the human indignity and bring it back to human dignity.
So, last question, quickly, if you may. It's not the first time that the M23 rebels are on the edge of Goma. Is the situation different from the other times?
Well, just as a personal testimony, I've been on ground in 2012, 2014 in Bulengo IDP camp, in 2007, 2008. I would say it has been now 2-3 years of conflict. The denominator, the critical mass of IDPs around Goma. So, comparison is no reason, one says, but this is without any comparison. So it is critical, and all need to stop this.
All need to stop this. Thank you very much. Hopefully that's a message that people will hear. Thank you very much, Emmanuel Lar from Médecins Sans Frontières. Thank you very much for your testimony. Now, access to social media is now blocked in South Sudan for at least 30 days, a measure following tensions that first flared up after South Sudanese nationals were killed in Sudan, and graphic videos of the violence sparked outrage back home. This led to violent protests and looting of Sudanese-owned businesses in South Sudan. Olivia Abizo has the story.
The ban on Facebook and TikTok began at midnight on Thursday, and it could be extended to 90 days. The South Sudanese government has said that this ban is crucial in order to protect its population from a further escalation of violence. Last week, a very disturbing video was shared on social media. It shows South Sudanese people in Wad Medani, which is in Sudan's Jazeera state, being attacked, it's believed, by Sudanese army soldiers. Now, that video caused an outrage in the South Sudanese capital, Juba. Retaliation attacks were organized, there were protests, and shops owned by Sudanese people in the capital, Juba, were attacked. 19 people were killed in that violence, and so the government put in place a curfew. But many South Sudanese people have criticised this social media ban online. They say that it's the equivalent of censorship, an attack on their freedom of speech. South Sudan gained independence from Sudan in 2011 after a very long and brutal civil war. But despite their separation, the two countries maintain very important ties. After the war broke out in Sudan in April of 2023, a lot of Sudanese found refuge in South Sudan and continue to do so. But this violence being shared and circulated online has caused tension between the two countries. The South Sudanese President Salva Kiir has urged Sudan to protect South Sudanese in the country, and he's also called on international organizations to launch an investigation into these killings. And in other news, we now know when people from Gabon could go to the polls. The presidential election is set to be held on April 12 this year, marking an end to the military rule. Gabon's interim president, Brice Oligui Nguema, seized power in a coup almost 2 years ago, ending the long-standing rule of his predecessor, Ali Bongo, and his family. In November, Gabon voted yes in a referendum on a new constitution following a promise by the military coup leaders to take steps towards restoring constitutional rule. Is Yahya Jammeh about to get back into politics in the Gambia? The country's former president says he intends to take back control of his political party. Jammeh has been in exile in Equatorial Guinea since 2017 when he lost an election to current president Adama Barrow. He sent an audio message to his supporters from the Alliance for Patriotic Reorientation and Construction, in which he said he was coming back. Mozambique opposition leader said he was not interested in joining the new government. Venancio Mondlane claims to have won the October Mozambique presidential election. Daniel Chapo was sworn in as president a week ago, vowing to unite Mozambique after weeks of unrest. Meanwhile, the country's business community is trying to get back to work. The recent protests have cost the private sector millions of dollars. Report by Caroline Dumais and Stéphane Costant in Maputo.
Merrick is the largest agri-food group in Mozambique. It was also one of the worst affected by looting after post-election protests in October. Hundreds of people entered the plant on Christmas Day. The manager says it put his pasta and flour factories out of operation.
Some of them are new. They banned. This side, they took the product, and not only taking the product, they banned everything.
The company lost 7 million euros in equipment alone. It will take a good year to get back on its feet.
This type of equipment, it's not like a clothes where you go to the shop and buy. They have to manufacture it. It's difficult because we don't know what will happen tomorrow. So all these situations, unpredictable.
Confidence needs to be restored so businesses can reinvest. More than 500 companies were looted in December. And difficulties with supply are all the greater because the border with South Africa is regularly closed. More than 1,000 trucks pass through every day to reach the port of Maputo. For this economist, the crisis is affecting the whole region.
This corridor, Maputo corridor with South Africa, which we had there blockades that were disrupting supply chains of important commodities such as coal and chromium.
Maputo and Pretoria are doing everything they can to secure the border and to reassure visitors from Southern Africa. But the violence has halted tourism in Mozambique. This famous market in the capital is empty, much to the despair of the vendors.
It's an awful, awful situation that's brought misery and suffering. We depend on sales to tourists who come here. But there are no more tourists here. People are afraid.
To revive the economy, the first task of the new government will be to reassure the public.
And this concludes our edition of Eye on Africa. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more news on France 24.